So Marco Rubio saying that they are exploring other countries outside of El Salvador to ship deportees to. Let's take a listen.
And I say this unapologetically, we are actively searching for other countries to take people from third countries. So we are actively, not just El Salvador, we are working with other countries to say, we want to send you some of the most despicable human beings to your countries. Will you do that as a favor to us? And the further away from America, the better, so they can't come back across the border. I'm not apologetic about it. We are doing that. The president was elected to keep America safe and to get rid of a bunch of perverts and pedophiles and child rapists out of our country.
So searching for other countries, no details there about what countries or whether they would also be shipped just to those countries or to prisons as they have been in El Salvador, this, place that people are never let out of and they're indefinitely. And it's interesting, Emily, because it comes as there's this new New York Times investigation into the deal that the Trump administration made with Bukele, who what does he call himself? Like the coolest dictator in the world or something like that?
Yeah. The cool dictator.
The cool dictator. So anyway, we could put, this is C5, guys, if we could skip ahead to C5 and put this up on the screen. So it turns out, they have this sort of contractual relationship where the Trump administration is paying some amount, 12 million is one of the dollar amounts I heard floated, of money to Bukele to house these Venezuelans who have been, who were summarily deported with no due process whatsoever under the pretense that they were alien enemies and they were the worst of the worst and they were Tren de Aragua gang members. So in any case, Bukele had apparently agreed to house only what he called, quote, convicted criminals in the prison. However, many of the Venezuelan men that had been labeled gang members and terrorists by the U.S. government had not been tried in court. Mr. Bukele was willing to let the U.S. use his prisons with conditions, he told Rubio and Mauricio Claver-Caroni, Mr. Trump's Latin American envoy. He did not want to bring in non-criminal migrants. He could not convince Salvadorans that he was prioritizing their national interests if he turned their country into a dumping ground for U.S. deportees from other countries, he explained to Mr. Trump's aides. But he did agree to take in violent criminals, no matter their nationality, for a fee, which would help to subsidize the country's prison system. So because the Trump administration shipped off, the vast majority of the people they shipped out had zero criminal records. According to the New York Times, even Bukele was like, this is a problem. This is not what we agreed to. Now, he, of course, has gone along with it. It's very possible this leak to the New York Times is a bit of ass covering for himself, especially as he's found all of these Democratic senators and members of Congress flying down to El Salvador saying, hey, this guy has no gang affiliation. They shipped him here indefinitely because of some mom and dad tattoo or an autism awareness tattoo, or in the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, they admit that they messed up and shouldn't have sent him here, like, you need to do something. So it's creating domestic political problems for Bukele. So it could have been that leads to this leak to the New York Times of like, this is not really what we agreed to. And the last thing, Emily, I'll say before I get your reaction is, in the initial 3 plane loads that were sent, and you guys remember this dramatic situation with the judge saying you got to turn those planes around. They don't do it, and a 3rd plane actually departs. They claim not under Alien Enemies Act, but in any case departs even after that order is issued. On those planes, there were a number of women. This is an all-male facility.
Yep.
And so those women, Bukele said, we're not taking these women. Yep. So they sent the women back. In addition, there were also some high-level MS-13 members that were in our criminal justice system facing, charges and punishment that Bukele wanted back. And Ryan did the first report on this over a drop site, that Bukele wanted back because he, as part of his crackdown, has also been cutting deals with MS-13, either for, hey, you guys can, do your thing over there, but not in this neighborhood where the tourists are. Yep. Hey, I'll make sure some of your people get a little bit better prison conditions, et cetera. So that was another part of the deal. And sorry, I keep going on and saying one last thing.
No.
Also, we had talked before about this dude who, the Trump administration did a big press conference about this is the East Coast head of MS-13.
Yes.
We are going to charge him. He is going to prison. We are so proud of ourselves. Now, quietly, all of those charges have been dropped, and he is just being deported through regular channels before there can be any scrutiny into what the hell happened there. Now, it's possible they just didn't have the goods on this guy, and they just made up some bullshit, and he was not the MS-13, East Coast head, and when it came to trying to prove this in court, it was not going to work out, so they just quietly tried to save face. Or it could be this is one of the dudes who is part of this dealing with Bukele.
Well, yeah, I mean, think about that for a second. This is the invocation of there's a lot of juicy stuff in this New York Times story, but the invocation of the Alien Enemies Act is predicated on this idea that the Venezuelan government is directing Tren de Aragua to invade the United States. It is a very flimsy premise.
It's preposterous.
It's a very flimsy premise that was intentionally concocted by people in the Trump administration to be able to get around the regular channels of due process. Stephen Miller said that openly, that it was part of the plan because they know mass deportations with the regular due process, that is the clear implication of what Stephen Miller has said, regular deportations you can't do at the level of quote-unquote mass deportations if you go through those channels without dramatically boosting the immigration judge system, which then can kind of...
And they're cutting the immigration judge system, by the way.
There are problems with that because it can become a carrot. If you can start hearing cases really quickly, it did become in the Biden administration an incentive for people to keep trying, but the Trump administration can deal with that pretty easily by Remain in Mexico policies. If that is their problem with it, they could deal with it in other ways. But the idea that the East Coast kingpin of MS-13 needs to be sent back, that they have charges, that they do a big splashy press conference. Pam Bondi did a huge, high-profile press conference to tout the arrest of this man and the charges against this man. I think the charges were dropped within a month. It might have even been less than that. And they didn't just send him to El Salvador. They literally dropped these charges, this big case that they were touting against him. And that gets to a quote, which, by the way, is, again, a follow-up on the drop site reporting, which was way ahead of this story. CNN then had a piece that came out earlier this week as well. This is from Douglas Farah in the New York Times, an El Salvador expert who between 2018 and 2022 collaborated with the Justice Department Vulcan Task Force, which targeted MS-13. He says, quote, "What Bukele is desperate for is to get these guys back in El Salvador before they talk in U.S. court."
Yep.
So I'm reading these leaks from State, which also included that big CNN piece earlier this week. It looks like some of this is probably coming from Bukele world, and I would take all of the sincerity of that, I would take all of that with a grain of salt. But what's also interesting is it sounds to me like most of this is coming from State Department world, that there's ass covering happening in State Department world saying we were uncomfortable with the answers to Bukele's questions about whether these were actually MS-13 members. So now the question becomes, and this has actually always been the question to some extent, on what level does the Alien Enemies Act allow you to deport people if there's tenuous or if there's very thin evidence of their alleged involvement in this invasion, right? So Stephen Miller thinks that you can just get rid of every foreign national in that area, but if your intelligence is telling you that this invocation of the Alien Enemies Act in and of itself is the premise to that doesn't work. Does that become a legal problem for the administration? And let me just say, Stephen Miller isn't sweating that. Stephen Miller, like this, he does not see this as a significant blow to his process, that there are constitutional questions being raised, or to his project, I should say, because their plan was to throw everything at the wall and see what would stick, knowing that some of it would not, because they want to do mass deportations. And if you want to do mass deportations, they're correct. That is going to be very difficult, and if the American people voted for that, there's going to be a lot standing in the way of your effort to achieve that end. But he knows that some of this stuff is going to get hung up in the courts, and his allies in the administration know that. That's the point of doing this strategy, where you're just like, there's actually some quotes in this piece about how he was like, "Don't worry." Like,
he said, "Don't worry about the law," something like that.
Yeah, right. Like you have to go fast. And so they're worried that they're not going to be able to do, quote, mass deportations. But what they're not worried about is, being accused of like flouting the Constitution. They think that the Constitution isn't set up to deal with this problem of mass immigration under Biden.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they don't care about the Constitution. They don't care about the legality. They don't care about due process. They don't care if they mistakenly send someone there, and know that it's a mistake. They'll just say, like, he deserves to be there. I don't care. And part of the strategy is, and this is something we talked about from the beginning of this administration too, is the more horrific and the more cruel the images and the stories that come out, the more they're hoping that people will quote unquote self-deport. Because now the Republican budget has a lot more resources for ICE and a lot more resources for the private prison contractor to set up additional detention centers, et cetera. But, there are not the resources to have this, the mass deportation scale that a Stephen Miller would love to see. And so I know it's this cliche, the cruelty is the point, but that they will actually themselves admit that.
Yes.
It's true. And so that's how he's looking. I mean, Stephen Miller he is truly an ideological racist. Like, he has a political program, and I don't think he cares whether it's popular or not. He has a thing he wants to do, and he does not care what's going to stand in his way of doing that. And I think Trump has outsourced his entire immigration policy to Stephen Miller. You guys talked about him actually believing MS-13 was literally tattooed on Kilmar Abrego Garcia's knuckles when it was the most obvious Photoshop in history.
Yep.
I think Stephen Miller just told him that this is real, and he just believes it. I think Stephen Miller told him that the Supreme Court decision went 9-0 their way, even though that is the polar opposite of what happened, and he just believes it. I mean, that's what he seemed to say in the Oval Office. So this has been completely outsourced to Stephen Miller. But, it did expose that there's a little bit of a potential pressure point that Chris Van Hollen and, the other Democrats who flew down to El Salvador, that they were kind of pushing on, which is that El Salvador, Bukele has his own domestic political situation. Yes, he's very popular there, but that can always change.
Yep.
So he has his own domestic political situation to think about. And he also has to think about, Republic, it's not going to be President Trump forever.
Yep.
And so if you have made your country enemy number one of Democrats, and they're set to take power,
who may control Congress.
They're going to probably
soon.
control Congress in less than 2 years,
which gives them investigatory powers.
Very possible, yes, that's right, and very possible that they take back the White House in 2028. You start to get a little nervous about where all of this is going, and I do think we are ultimately headed to this invocation of the Alien Enemies Act being deemed unsupportable,
yes,
because on so many levels,
and it should be.
It's not an invasion. We're not at war. Venezuela is not working with Nicaragua. The way that it's been implemented, these judges are human beings, are going to look at this and be like, this is outrageous what the administration is doing. And so I think it is likely that their invocation is going to get struck down. They're already being blocked in a number of jurisdictions across the country from continuing these deportations under this provision. But, and that comes back to Marco Rubio saying, we're looking at other countries where we could do the same thing.
Glenn has made this point that, and that's the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case. They actually could have, if they had gotten an agreement from Mexico, for example, they could have deported him at any moment, basically. They just couldn't deport him to El Salvador based on all of this. Miller argues that because of the Alien Enemies Act, they still could, but that's not clear cut. And even conservative attorneys like Andy McCarthy and Ed Whalen have come back on that.
Administration itself argued in court that it was a mistake.
And then
they
they fired
it's
him.
a mistake.
And then they fired that guy from the DOJ.
Yeah, but I mean, there were multiple court filings, and this is their position in court, is that it was a mistake.
Completely agree. Stephen Miller comes down and says, no, we could do what we want. Get out of here, DOJ. Even the Trump DOJ. You guys, why would you ever admit an error? You're harming the project of mass deportation by admitting we can't do this, because this is what we have to do. We have to be pushing these lines and these boundaries in order to end up with mass deportation. And honestly, if we take this in a seriously, because there is a chunk of the American people that looks at the mass immigration during the Biden administration, and from my perspective, talking to some of these people, it's so the lives that they live may be better than what they had in Venezuela. I mean, one of these migrants was protesting Maduro. And that's why Republicans have often supported the asylum policies that we have, is protesting Maduro. They end up having to live these precarious existences in the United States, hiding. Abrego Garcia was pulled over for driving erratically with an expired license. I mean, a reason that you try to avoid going to the government in some of those, renewing licenses or whatever, is because you're in fear of being deported. It's not a great existence, even if it's better than Venezuela or El Salvador. And our process right now sucks. It keeps people in these situations for 10 plus years. He had come into this country, 2012, Abrego Garcia?
I think that's right, yeah.
And had just sort of been living in the shadows. And it's not good for anybody. And there needs to be a solution to this. And the solution is always going to involve horrible, mistakes and heart-wrenching heart-wrenching examples of people who end up getting deported who had lives here, the administration needs to deal with that. They need to realize that you're not going to be able to just flout the Constitution, use things like Alien Enemies Act. All that's going to end up doing is creating less public support for what you're doing in the first place. And it's going to take time away from what you could be doing, which is building up a system to actually deal with the literal millions of people who are here living these precarious existences, which just isn't a good situation for anybody. But I don't see basically any movement in that direction. Glenn has made this point that actually it's not that hard to go through the court system if you focus on it. It's not that hard to bring him back here, try him.
Yeah, well, they were already, the State Department was coming up with plans to bring him back because this is not the first time that someone has been mistakenly deported.
Yes.
And you just go,
you deal with it.
This is terrible. I'm sorry. We're going to get you back and like follow the They were already working on those plans. And then, you know, whoever in the Trump administration came over the top and were like, no, yeah, we made a mistake. We don't care. He's going to stay. And again, this is not just deportation. This is you are locked in a prison for life. Your wife, your family, your lawyers, like you have no access to anyone except a brief meeting with Chris Van Hollen, right? You are cut off from the entire world, potentially forever. Sentenced to life in prison in a foreign prison. Now, Kilmar Abrego Garcia has been moved to a different facility. But for the rest of these guys in CCOT, like this place is known for torture and human rights abuse.
And there are rules against that we abide by in the U.S. as well.
Yeah, extraordinary rendition. That's exactly right. You cannot ship someone off and then be like, oh, well, you know, the Egyptian government or whoever, they're going to do what they're going to do and it's not our fault. Like if you know the conditions that the people are being sent to, then you are still responsible for those conditions. So in any case, you're absolutely right in the way that, I mean, if you look at the way public opinion has dramatically shifted already with regard to how they feel about immigration, certainly how they feel about Trump's handling of immigration, how they feel about Kilmar Abrego Garcia and all of this, it has been a dramatic flip. And it's what we saw in the first term as well, where the public had never been more pro-immigrant than they were during Trump's first term in office.
And then that swung back wildly during the Biden administration, which is why I think Stephen Miller, like how often do we hear them claiming a mandate? Well, they're misinterpreting. First of all, I mean, the question of whether if you win, 49% of the vote, you have a mandate is another question. But they're misinterpreting that mandate as something that it isn't. And I don't even know if it's an accidental misinterpretation. I think it's probably a willful misinterpretation because Stephen Miller knows that this is a very slim window. And again, if you're doing the math as him, that is correct. Like this is a very slim window in order to do mass deportations because House Democrats are going to take back over, public support is going to shift. So they're trying really hard to just put their foot on the accelerator.
But, to go back to Glenn's point, like, Democrats passed the frickin' Laken-Riley Act with Republicans. If you wanted to expedite the system and hire more immigration judges and have this aggressive approach, I don't support it, but they could have done it. Democrats were willing to vote for basically whatever on immigration at the beginning of this term. You have your budgeting process and you're willing to move all sorts of monies around with DOJ. Like, if you wanted to do this in some sort of even approaching lawful way, that path was available. But that would not have entailed the level of horror that Stephen Miller wants this process to entail, so that they can trigger the self-deportations that they see as being critical to this. So, the Guantanamo Bay, that was the same reason that they were sending immigrants also to Guantanamo Bay. And I think are continuing to do so, even though there had been some reports that a number of those immigrants had been removed, using military planes. This is way more expensive than the private ICE flights that they normally use. But again, it's to generate this, this spectacle. The ASMR, deportation, incredibly disturbing to me, videos that they put out. Of course, I'm going down to CCOT. It's all about a spectacle of horror. And, so he has no interest in going through, any sort of approaching lawful process to effectuate this outcome because it wouldn't achieve his aims. Ultimately, and so that's why he's, pursued, very specifically has pursued this particular path. I want to get to some really good news in the fight against the crackdown on pro-Palestine students who have been arrested for things like writing op-eds or, for, in the case of Mahmoud Khalil, for being a negotiator on the Columbia campus protests. One of the people who had really attracted a lot of attention is Mohamed Madawi. He has now been actually released from prison, from detention, while his case was adjudicated. Let's take a look at him walking out, because this is quite extraordinary. You can see him walking out here to cheers. I believe this was in Vermont, where this was all unfolding. And he also spoke, and his message to this cheering crowd here, you can see lots of Palestine flags, free Mohamed Madawi now, calling for due process, etc. His message coming out was, I am not afraid of Donald Trump. Let's go ahead and take a listen to that.
What did they do to me? They arrested me. What's the reason? Because I raised my voice and they said no to war, yes to peace. Because I said enough is enough to President Trump and his cabinet. Yes. I am not afraid of you.
The judge, in making this decision, also made some extraordinary statements which would have huge implications not just for Madawi, but also for many of the other students who've been arrested and detained and, are being threatened with deportation for their advocacy for Palestine. Let's go ahead and put this up on the screen. Jeffrey Crawford, the judge in Wednesday's ruling, wrote that those who know Madawi describe him as a peaceful figure who seeks consensus in a highly charged political environment. But, Crawford added, even if he were a firebrand, his conduct is protected by the First Amendment. The court is aware he has offended his political opponents, apparently given rise to concerns of the State Department. He is an obstacle to American foreign policy. Just think about how preposterous that is. Such conduct is insufficient to support a finding that he is in any way a danger, as we use that term in the context of detention and release. Legal residents not charged with crimes or misconduct are being arrested and threatened with deportation for stating their views on the political issues of the day, Crawford said, citing the Red Scare and McCarthy-era targeting of people for their political views. The wheel of history has come around again, but as before, these times of excess will pass. So, we'll see if this ruling stands. We'll see if there are other judges who make similar decisions. But, the fact that Madawi at least was able to get this win, and you have one judge, federal judge, saying, listen, you can't just deport someone because you don't like their opinion on a political issue, is a very significant development here.
The justification for this deportation order via the State Department is very problematic, similar to the Mahmoud Khalil situation, in that they cite, this is a Rubio memo, anti-Semitism, basically, and they say, this is from the Immigration and Nationality Act, I think it's 1952, is what Rubio has been citing, and that's what's we were talking about this with Stephen Miller earlier and the Alien Enemies Act. I think they're right now testing the fundamental constitutionality of the State Department and the Secretary of State being able to revoke visas on the idea that somebody is a threat to the United States national security. And then you take that second layer, in this case, of saying that somebody's alleged anti-Semitism is a threat to national security is a very, they're testing the constitutionality of that, and I think rightfully so. Did you see the government, I'm reading from NBC News right now, they included 2 exhibits in their filing which have been filed under seal. One of the exhibits, this has been going sort of viral on X, and I don't know what to think of it, which NBC News has reviewed, is a 2015 report from the Windsor Police Department in Vermont, where a gun shop owner told officers that Madawi supposedly told the owner that he used to build machine guns to, quote, kill Jews while he was in Palestine. In his declaration, Madawi said that he recalled visiting a gun shop in Windsor, Vermont, but that he is, quote, absolutely certain that I never expressed the words the report falsely attributes to me in that exchange or ever. I'm a peaceful person and would never express wanting to harm or kill anyone. I'm heartbroken to have such appalling words, which stand in complete contrast to my philosophy of life and spiritual beliefs, misattributed to me. It's such a strange, another situation where the administration, you would think, would have cited that immediately.
If that was the thing, we would know about it. Yeah.
Of that. So I imagine there's more to come from this gun shop owner as this case goes on. But a very strange, I just feel like that's a very strange part of the story or subplot in the story, because I guess if this is about anti-Semitism to the Rubio memo, the point in the Rubio memo, if he said that he killed Jews while he was in Palestine, then I suppose you can prove that he's anti-Semitic, but even then you have to prove the anti-Semitism is a harm to U.S. foreign policy. And again, like that would augment that argument. But quite an interesting situation where you have, what is he? He's Buddhist?
Yeah, I think so.
It's very weird.
Well, and if you listen to him on 60 Minutes, like he's very clear about, I see the, justice for Israelis and Palestinians and freedom for them as being linked, and I abhor anti-Semitism. Like he's been very consistent on that. I mean, listen, I have no idea. I haven't seen or heard anything about this like gun shop situation. I will say that, look, even if you say something that is horrible like that, you still shouldn't be able to deport someone just for their speech. I mean, that's basically the judge's point, is like, there's no evidence that he is a firebrand. All the evidence is that he's, this very like peace-loving, like consensus-building type. But even if he was, you still can't just deport someone because you don't like what they have to say.
Well, their
right?
justification,
or you don't like,
at least.
You don't like what you imagine is in their heart with regard to this group of people or that group of people.
It makes their justification here is what is they don't have, whether that justification, I should say, is legitimate remains the question, even if he said that. Like their justification for deporting him, like they would have to find, again, like you can try people. You can actually go through another process, but the point is just doing as many things as quickly as possible in order to sort of flood the zone. And from there, and to use this issue as a cudgel, both in their war against lefties generally, in their war against universities. Like this is the issue that they don't care about anti-Semitism. They're using this issue as a cudgel to effectuate other ends. Well, I think there's a part of the sort of conservative movement that has very much been conditioned that this is the most, like, this is the tip of the spear on campus issues. So if you get rid of the alleged anti-Semites, then you've just removed the tip of the spear. And I think some people genuinely do believe in this. I think a lot of people don't, and it's almost like half and half.
Yeah, I'm referring specifically to Donald Trump.
Oh, yeah.
Donald Trump does not give a shit about anti-Semitism.
I don't think he's super concerned about this, but he knows that, again, like Miriam Adelson is, and I'm sure Marco Rubio probably is. So that's how it's, but again, like I think we've talked about this recently, it's turning kind of some of the online right people off. And some of them is like, okay, so you turned off Candace Owens, but I guess she has a big audience.
Yeah, well, we'll get to the Alex Jones, Nick Fuentes.
Oh, yes, that's right. We have that coming up.
It's a good preview for our last block. All right, let's go ahead and get to some of these 2028 Democratic contenders and the way they're positioning themselves.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.